Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching it if you've chosen to watch. I have a very exciting topic for us today and an exciting guest. And actually, I'll just start with who our guest is because she and I now have recorded officially. This will be the third podcast together because I was on her podcast. She has been on mine now, but then also my work podcast, The Frontline, that was also a podcast where Melissa joined. So let me give you a little intro into Melissa. Melissa Brown is our guest today. Her educational background, so you know, includes a Master of Arts in Organizational and Business Management, specializing in human resources. She has several certifications in remote staffing, adult education, and training development. Melissa has more than 20 years of experience sharing her expertise deeply rooted in lifelong learning and her devotion to growing and developing people, which I think we all can get behind. She enjoys finding creative solutions to business challenges, innovating new products, and developing organizational processes and efficiencies. She's one of the top thought leaders in the nation on how to work remotely for professional practices. And Melissa, that is exactly what we're going to talk all about today. But tell us what else we don't know about you, and welcome officially to this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So, okay, what you don't know about me is I'm also a mom of 7 children. And I absolutely have loved raising my children and being a mom. I got to be a stay-at-home mom for 10 years while the first little group grew up, which was wonderful and challenging and had its own set of things, you know, as we deal with as stay-at-home moms who really want to be entrepreneurs and business women. But I'm lucky because now I'm almost empty nesting. Yes, I have 5 of them who have grown and are out of the home. And so I have just 2 littles who are still here, and they're very little, so 4 and 5. And so I'm excited to be a mom and entrepreneur and businesswoman and really be in this scope in these days for remote work. So there's nothing more exciting than that.
That's amazing. I love that. And I will say I already knew this about you since we've now recorded 3 times. But I remember the first time you said you had 7 children, I was like, I wasn't shocked. I was just so impressed that you've essentially been able to do it all, because I think that was one of the things that we had initially talked about, is that it's hard. I'm sure it's hard. I don't know yet from personal experience that raising one child alone is difficult while having a career, but you've managed to raise 7 and still have your career. So I think that's a super, you've earned all of the bragging rights. You're welcome. And also your podcast, which I did not mention, is called Understaffed. So I'll make sure that there is a link to that in the show notes. If you guys follow me on Instagram, then you already know I was sharing all about that podcast about your podcast, Melissa, because I was on one of the episodes. So why don't we jump into the topic of the century, which is obviously labor and labor shortages and labor and staffing challenges and everything in between, right? When we think about like the challenges with staffing today, what do you think are some of the biggest ones that we have to consider as HR professionals?
I think what we're hearing is I can't find help, and then I can't find good help. That's most commonly. I mean, thousands and thousands of practice owners have passed me in the last several months. I've been at places where they are, and that's what they come by and say. I can't find anybody. Yes, we're understaffed. Gosh, I mean, who isn't? You know, and then they're saying, and then when I do find somebody that I think is going to work out, they don't want to work. They don't want to work, so I can't find good staff. And so I think those are the 2 biggest, most obvious of the topics. And I say, well, listen, we can solve that. How much are you willing to think outside the box?
Right. Yeah, thinking outside of the box is probably some of the best advice that we can give HR folks for really any topic, because so much of what we do is very much in the gray. But I think that we so desire this like black and white approach to things. Like we want to have some clarification on things like structure, and we yearn for that, right? Like we create structure most of the time in our roles, but actually it's like, okay, you create structure, but you still have to operate in the gray. So how are you coloring outside of the lines and thinking more broadly?
Right.
It's a
I remember.
paradox.
Right, exactly. I remember somebody. I said, oh, I really want to, take my minor in human resources. When I go study in college, and I said because it's so black and white. And this HR person looked at me and goes, "Huh?" And she goes, "Oh no, honey, it is not black. It is not black and white." And I'm like, "But it's rules." And she's like, "Okay, well, maybe you'll just have to get your hands dirty before you realize that there's a lot of gray." And you just touched on it, right? Is that we want it to be black and white. We want it to be this is the rules and whatever. But there's this gray in which we have to consider people.
Right,
Right?
right, exactly. Because people come with nuance. I mean, like there is no black and white mentality that would work within this career. And it's so funny. I'm so glad that we can giggle about this now, because I'm sure it's just like someone listening is like, this is really not funny, Tracy. Like I
Right.
really need more structure. But at the end of the day, the structure is in the lack of structure, I suppose. That you
Yeah.
can, of course there are those anchor moments, right? Like whether it's a handbook or a policy. But I think one of the coolest parts about HR is that we take that anchor, and then the nuance sets in. It's like, okay, well, what precedent are we willing to set? How can we color outside of the lines? What are the gray areas here that allow us to be more flexible? And that's like really where some of the magic happens in HR, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's altering and changing and moving as the times change, and I think that we're seeing that, right? We're seeing in HR that we're having to change with the times. We're having to change because the generation is different now who's entered the workforce. We're having to change because the times are different. COVID hit, all of those things. So now we're having to say, okay, great, this was our handbook, this was what we're working with, but in order to stay on the curve, we're going to have to change some things.
Right. So when we think about this coming back to, some of the challenges with the workforce and staffing, one of the things that I shared right before we started recording was that there's this article that was posted on LinkedIn a few days ago about remote job opportunities growing scarcer, and that in terms of the number of paid postings on LinkedIn offering remote work, that from December 2022 to December 2021, there was a decrease in this percentage. So specifically in 2021, 18.4% of paid postings were for remote opportunities. And in December 2022, that number dropped to 13.8%, which is roughly 5 units or 5 points. And so this concept, I guess, obviously I should clarify that this is only based on paid postings for LinkedIn, but we know that LinkedIn is a huge source and sourcer of jobs and job postings. So what are your initial thoughts when I share the scarcity that there is around remote jobs today?
I think this is scary. I think this is very scary. What this tells me initially, without digging into it a tremendous amount, is that human resources are falling back on their old ways. Owners, business owners, all of that. They're going back to what I always did, always worked, so I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to go back to that, and that scares me. That scares me because we're not following the trends. We're not going towards what this workforce wants. And so you're going to continue to struggle, and you're going to continue to tell me you can't find good people. You're going to continue to tell me that you're still understaffed because you went back to your old ways. I mean, I think we talked about this on your last one, on the last podcast, is that, these big companies, right, said, oh, well, remote work, we're going to do the charge. And then they pulled back too. And I'm like, what's going on? So you want to pay the high overhead, huh? You want to pay for that office space. So, what is it that's causing people to do this? And I think it's a fear in human resources, I think. And that fear is driving decisions to do things the way that they have been.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess to double down or up the ante on this, you know, it's probably also a fear from HR folks in pushing back on other business leaders who might be saying, oh, we need to have people in person. Because at the end of the day, this was the same thing that we heard in 2020 when we were all forced to go remote, which again, I mean, that was like a dream come true for me and for many people to finally have the flexibility that we wanted, right? But people were afraid of saying to other business leaders or executive teams, oh, hey, this is not what employees want. This is not what people want. And to your point, now we have this trend where we know people want flexibility. It's not to say that everyone wants to be remote 100% of the time, but people want to have the ability to decide. They want to have the ownership and the autonomy. So I totally agree with you that there is definitely a reflection here in terms of how people are thinking. Do you find, given that you are the COO for a company that focuses all about focuses all on staffing, do you find that people are afraid of giving autonomy to employees, or is this actually more so coming from a place of, well, it's difficult to engage people while remote, and so we're going to take the easy way out and just bring everyone back?
I think it's several. I think it's several things. I think their fear is of the unknown. So they haven't used remote work before. And so they're afraid to try it because they're not going to be able to micromanage like they did before, or they feel like they won't be able to. They're not, it's not something where you can stand behind the person and watch what they're doing. So that kind of fear of letting go, especially in the smaller practices that I deal with, the smaller businesses, it is the autonomy too. It's, are you going to do the work that you say that you're going to do? We're really lucky in our business because we deal with front desk staffing primarily, so front end staffing in businesses, and so that's that receptionist role. And really, when the phone's ringing, they're answering it, so you know that they're doing the work. It's all the extra things that we're really cautious to really make sure that we're showing that they're doing the work. And I think that's just putting practices into place. And we really work with people when they come in to say, you just have to have another playbook. This is just looks a little bit differently than what your current playbook looks like. So now you need to put it on paper. You need to put that job description on paper. You need to have a certain set of tasks when they're not busy or when the phone's not ringing. And that just needs to be laid out. And we'll help you do that. And we help a lot of business owners really put those policies and what we call protocols into place into their business. And so really that's what it's about. I think that scary stuff can kind of go away when, again, they see the black and white.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. As you were saying this, I recalled something that I read this morning in the wee hours of the morning that really excited me, and that was that Maryland is actually discussing. I think that they've put through a bill that would subsidize employers who provide or basically enforce 4-day work weeks, 32-hour work weeks without any change to employees' pay or benefits. And so part of me is like, woo, this is amazing. Let's all move to Maryland. The other part of me is like, well, if we're not even getting the remote work right, how are we going to get the 4-day work week right? And how are businesses going to change? But one of the things that I really want us to weigh in on here is this concept of, where businesses, or what maybe businesses are waiting for to make these changes. Is it going to be the government subsidizing or creating regulation, like one way or the other? Or are there always going to be like those early adopters? I mean, I never expected this from Maryland. I don't know, just not what I would have like put my money on. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think people are putting too much stake in what, the big companies are doing, or, what their
Mm.
friends are doing, or what their counterparts are doing, or what the community's doing. Again, I work in an area that they've got a very tight community. So if their friends are doing it, then they're more likely, obviously, to try it out, and to test it out. So I don't know necessarily what people are waiting for. Are they waiting for a catastrophic disaster to happen in their business before they realize this can truly, taking on remote work can really lower their overhead and increase their ROI? I mean, like, that is my question. That is my nut to crack all of the time, is what are we waiting for? What is
Mm-hmm.
the hesitation here? We all proved it worked. It worked, okay?
Mm-hmm.
For every big business, every small business, it worked. So why are we reverting back to our old ways, and why are we not pushing forward? And the fact of the matter is I think technology and the world is changing. It has changed, and we're either going to need to press forward or we're going to be left behind, and that scares me for small businesses. And that scares me because before they know it, their business will close. It took one catastrophic disaster like COVID to close so many small business doors because they were not moving ahead. They were
Yeah.
not progressing. And so, folks, if you do have a small business, if you're running one of these, which is what, under 50 or whatever it is, you've got to be prepared. You've got to be moving forward your business. And that's in technologies, that's in your staffing, that's all of that. You've got to stay on the curve. So that means you do have to think outside that box of what we've normally done. And so, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I would love to see subsidies, but folks, we can't wait on the government. We know how that works too.
Yeah. Right, exactly. We have to be the change that we wish to see in the world, right? It's so interesting when you share this perspective about, putting too much stake in the big names around the country, around the world. And realistically, I mean, this is exactly what businesses do. They wait to see what others do. And you can, if you want to think about this on a smaller scale, if I even think about like retailers, this is very, coming from retail myself, this is very common where you wait and you see what your competitor is doing. So even if you're working for a retailer that isn't necessarily, a big named retailer, there is always that, waiting to see what the competition is doing. Now, with that perspective, I agree. I don't think you can wait for the government at all. You have to kind of decide what matters and what's important. But what I think is part of that is for businesses to recognize that these trends point to the same thing, that people and society have changed. There is less of a desire to be, so 1000% in work 24/7, and to really and truly have not just a balance but harmony and a separation, which I think I've said on this podcast before that I don't know that that's necessarily existed or been a priority since probably before like even my parents' generation. Because there's all I know is this like hustle mentality to go 24/7.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I know. That was my parents. My parents both worked, and that's what I grew up
Mm-hmm.
learning and seeing. But my children, raising children who are in the generation that we're talking about, are absolutely not that way. And I know that my husband and I sit there and go, "What? Oh my gosh, where did you come from?" Because, you know, because we're working on the weekends, we're working during the week, and they're going, I just can't get out of bed. And I'm like, okay, just because it's the weekend doesn't, they're just priorities are different, and the generation is
Mm-hmm.
different, and it's nothing we did wrong as parents. I'm gonna just say
Right.
because I feel like that, but it's really just the generation in which they're raised in, with technologies that we didn't have, and opportunities that we didn't have, and really we have to tap into that. We have to take a look at what they want, what their needs are, and that flexibility we've talked about before is very high. It's even above
Mm-hmm.
pay. It's even above pay. You know,
Mm-hmm.
flexibility. What's the first thing you want? Flexibility. Second thing, okay, I want good pay. But I really want the flexibility over the pay, and I'll take some, a 4-day work week over getting paid more, or whatever that looks like. So yeah, we have to evolve with that. We have to move with the times, and it's scary when we're not doing that. And remote work is part of that, and technology is the other part, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear this a lot being at a startup now. I hear this from like, people that I've connected with who work in startups as well, that there's this it's so interesting. It's like a paradox. It's the difference between, startup culture, which is like you're working a million hours because you have so much that you have to get done and there's so much to do and you're just like grinding it out to get to the result that you want. And then the other side of startup culture is like incredible perks, incredible benefits, huge amounts of flexibility. But what I think is so interesting when looking at an industry like technology or startups, we're seeing a ton of layoffs, layovers. I'm thinking about flights, a ton of layoffs within this industry, and it just makes me think that actually most industries are much similar with each other than we're allowing them to be. Like, why should technology be this the most advanced, the most progressive, but also the most intensive, when we know that retail actually can be that way too, and medicine can be that way as well. So I kind of feel like with one of the greatest things coming out of these challenging times, let's say, for labor and the workforce, is that industries are realizing that they're not necessarily that different from other industries, and companies can do more for their people if they just learn from those around them. Like, why shouldn't the head of Pepsi, who has done a lot to talk about why flexibility is like the greatest currency for employee engagement, why should that be any less valuable for than, for a leader within like a manufacturing or a healthcare industry, So I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm going on a tangent here, but there's probably some sort of value in sharing that knowledge across industries. If your company is remote or hybrid, then you know just how difficult it can be to grow your company's culture beyond a pre-scheduled Zoom happy hour or occasional lunch and learn. Well, this week's sponsor is here to solve that. They're called CultureBot. CultureBot has devised what will likely become the gold standard for growing and blossoming a company culture inside of Slack. The app is like a sidekick for any HR or people professional, automating a lot of the mundane tasks you probably are forgetting to do on a daily basis. Things like birthday and work anniversary celebrations, team shoutouts and kudos, employee introductions, and remote games. It even has health and wellness tips and conversation starters. If that piques your interest, this will get you even more excited. Today, I'm able to share a special promotion for listeners of the podcast. You can get your first 6 months of CultureBot for 50% off. Plus, if your team is under 25 employees, CultureBot is free forever. So if you're looking for a way to create a culture of appreciation and drive increased engagement and togetherness across your team, I definitely recommend checking out CultureBot. Go to getculturebot.com/humanhr. That's getculturebot.com/humanhr to get the offer. Plus, I've added the link in the show notes so you can just click right there. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think especially what we're talking about in human resources is that you should be sharing that. If you see someone, it doesn't have to be in your scope. I mean, again, that's why what I talk about is so universal. I work in a very specific niche, but what I really do scales across every industry. When I talk about remote work, when I talk about, those types of things that we can do and that flexibility and all of that, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, it applies. And that's not just in the industry that I'm in, the healthcare field, and very specifically veterinary, optical, and dental. But it doesn't matter, because you would never know that based on what we're talking about. You would never know that. And
Right.
I talk to people all the time. Manufacturing. We talked about that before. I've talked to a manufacturer. Why can't we get good help? Why are we not seeing people walk in the door and applications being handed in? We're giving away all this money. All of those different things. So it really doesn't matter what industry you're in. You in retail, I used to be in the restaurant. I mean, come on, talk about someone who's hurting for labor right now. Is the restaurant.
Yeah, seriously.
They never shut down, but it is a grueling industry as well as retail. So they have to start to change the way they look at things.
Absolutely. What do you think about this idea of, I've been seeing this thrown around, that it's an employer's market? Do you agree with that? Like, I guess I saw this coming out of all these layoffs, that because of that, the employees are not necessarily as much in the driver's seat, so people think. But yeah, what do you think about that concept that this is an employer's market?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, and that goes to the second problem, is I can't find people who want to work, or I don't think so. I think it's an employee's market for them to go out and win. But so that's one fold. But then I'm also thinking as I'm talking is that it's the employer's job to attract good talent. So they could be, I think they're in the driver's seat in so many ways, but I think there's a lot of people you can choose from. I could go to, I could go down in a strip mall and probably apply the old school way. I could apply to 6 or 7 people in the strip mall, right? It's going to be for me which one is the most appealing, which is going to provide the most flexibility, which is going to provide the best pay, which one looks the best for me and my schedule and my family and my life. So, in that aspect, as an employer, you're going to have to be attractive. And you can't just throw out sloppy ads. You can't just throw out a sloppy package. You can't just put a now hiring sign in the window anymore and think that that's going to get you the right people in. You're going to have to put out some good stuff if you want to attract good people.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I agree. I don't think it's an employer's market, because I think the moment we say that it's an employer's market is when we've forgotten every single lesson that we've learned over the last few years, which is that we have to understand what employee expectations are and employee demands. And you're right. Like, I walk down the street and I see all of these hiring signs, now hiring, in need of, right? Like, inquire within. But the reality is that there are so many options for people, even to just never have a boss of their own. Like, I mean, you take like influencer culture, right? People are making millions of dollars just sharing their lives on social media. And many of us, myself included, I couldn't even imagine like that for myself. I couldn't imagine sharing so much of my personal life, but people are making millions and millions of dollars doing that, and also still keeping people at a distance, even just by through consumerism. Like, the number of influencers that I follow who just reshare like Amazon links or links to different things, and those affiliate links are what make them money. I mean, it's incredible, right? But my point here is that the entire like ethos of what a job is and where people can make money has changed. And people don't necessarily see retail or hospitality or working in the restaurant business as a necessary first job, or even a job at all sometimes, right? It depends on what their passion and interests are. And it depends, I think, on all of those things that we know: flexibility, pay, etc. But it's so interesting. It's hard for me to imagine what the next 10 years will look like, knowing that millions of people are making millions of dollars in ways that 10 years ago didn't even seem possible.
Right. Which goes back to your initial question, right? With the drop in through Indeed, with the amount of remote jobs being offered. Again, why it's so scary is maybe we have this false sense that I can get people in and that I can just put the now hiring sign up, that I no longer have to offer remote, and yet we're struggling. And it's not I'm understaffed by one. It's now becoming I'm understaffed by 2, 3, 4. I talked to practice owners this last month, and they said, "Well, I lost 4 people at once. That's catastrophic. That's catastrophic to
Wow.
businesses. I lost,
Yeah.
yeah, I lost 2 techs and a front desk and a whatever." And I'm like, "Oh, that's not good." They're like, "No, it's not good. It's not good. It's very bad." So at any moment things can change. And so the minute that we get secure in, hey, I'm all staffed up, I always hear people, not always anymore, but you hear people say that, and we're all doing this. We're all knocking on wood at the same time, because it's a scary thing to say. And I said in the restaurant industry, if you say that you're staffed, you're one behind. You're never staffed.
Right.
You are never staffed. You're never at capacity. You should always be taking applications. You should always be looking, and you should always be looking for the right person. I tell my team that as well. Yeah, we may have the positions filled at the moment, but we are always hiring, because we are always looking for that diamond in the rough, and you never know when they're going to come in. And so I encourage businesses to do that as well. Always have that attractive package available. Keep that flexibility if you want to attract the right people, and always be hiring.
Mm-hmm. Retail does the same thing. If you're fully staffed, you are absolutely understaffed. Like, just keep hiring, just because you know that tomorrow's a new day and you could just lose every single person. You just never know.
Never know.
Oh man, the trauma. No, I actually really loved my career in retail, but it's not for everyone. And I'm sure the same goes in the restaurant business. Like, if you don't have the stomach for the things that people say to you on your worst days, then like you're not gonna make it.
I know.
Oh,
It takes us back to trauma, doesn't it? But
yes.
it keeps us pretty smart in how to staff and your plus one, plus two, plus threes. We
Right.
have that mentality ingrained in our heads. So I think,
Right.
again, if a lot of businesses took on that same mentality and learned from other businesses, realizing you're not much different, then they would not be in the situation that they probably are now.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that. Now, let's like switch gears a little bit here. How does hiring impact all of this, or how has hiring even changed? I mean, it's been a little while since I've gone through an interview process, but have there been like significant changes in, across the market, the job market?
Well, for me, I mean, we do hiring. We're really staffing experts in the remote field. So when you do staff in the remote industry, I think it's different than what you're looking for in terms of how you're staffing an in office type of position. So the tools that you're going to use are different. The qualifications are going to be a little bit different. You didn't have to say in the past, hey, do you have a working computer? Do you have internet at your home? Right? Those things are now things that you have to do. You have to think about using things like Zoom or Google or whatever those are to have interviews, because if you'd like them to work remote, they're probably in a remote location. Things like where should I hire from come into the realm of possibility. So if you're hiring in-house, you're looking 5 to 10 mile radius, 5 to 15 miles maybe. When you hire remote, you can really look globally. And so that starts to change how you do things. And so all of those are different perspectives when you're taking remote into account. I think, in terms of like what we were talking about, generational differences, in person used to be that now hiring sign with the paper application, and now it's scan the QR code, or you have to go through Indeed, or you have to go through the website. So to me, some of those things have become more difficult to find those in person jobs than they used to be.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I was thinking about some of the fatal flaws that I've been reading about on LinkedIn, for example, especially with layoffs, right? Like, there are all of these thousands of people impacted by these layoffs, and they're posting really vulnerably on LinkedIn saying, "Hey, I've been laid off and I've been going through interviews, and here's my experience." And I read something really interesting recently. I don't remember from where, but someone essentially said that layoffs are no longer this like taboo subject, and that people should feel comfortable talking about them and are more comfortable talking about when they go through them, because it's not necessarily a reflection of someone's performance. And I thought it was really interesting. But then fast forward, I'm reading about people's horrible experiences with interviews, and it's just not okay. And they're, of course, the audience here, they are HR professionals. I'm sure that there are some people out there listening who are not. And we have an opportunity to really educate, I think, on what an ideal interview process is like, even if it doesn't end with a job. So, can you walk us through some best practices and also fatal flaws that people should never, make mistakes of doing?
Well, so I come from two trains of thought here. So, of course, go back in my original days of when I used to do interviewing. And then now, again, it's really in a remote position that we do, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of looking and asking questions that go with there. But I think one of the biggest things is not allowing the interviewee to talk enough. I think for me, that was always my big thing. Is sometimes we spend so long talking that we're not actually listening, and we're not allowing them to do the talking. And what I used to teach my managers is ask one really great open-ended question and allow them to talk. They're going to tell you everything you can and can't ask, probably within that one question. And for
Right.
me, it was always, tell me about yourself. And so, really, in that, they're going to tell me everything. They're going to probably tell me if they have children, if they have a dog, they have a cat, they have a significant other. They're going to tell me everything, in you, which we know HR you can't say or ask. They're
Right.
going to give you their entire life story probably, and just allowing someone to talk. I think we're going to gain a lot more information than us doing most of the talking. I've been in a lot of interviews where they talk so much I don't even think I had much word in edgeways. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, how do you even know who I am now? And we're a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times now we're looking for culture fit, right? How do you learn if it's a culture fit if you don't allow that interviewee to talk? If you don't allow them to express who they are, and what's important to them in their life, and you're also going to learn what do you need to offer, what's going to be important to that person that you can offer them if you do want the job. And again, that's by determining if it's a culture fit in the beginning, if flexibility is important. If they tell you in the first 5 seconds that they got 3 kids, they probably want some flexibility in their life, and or whatever
Mm-hmm.
that might be, or that their hobby is snowboarding on the weekends or whatever it might be, right? So the more we allow them to open up, the more we can then determine whether it's a good fit, schedule wise, if it's a good culture fit, if it's going to be good for them in terms of, their living conditions or whatever that might look like. So I think one of the big flaws that I've remembered from this long is being able to just be quiet. Not
Amen. Right. It's true. There are surveys that I've sent out, throughout my career, candidate surveys, and that is always like one of the top 3 pieces of feedback. Like when asked, did the interviewer get to know me? And the
Mhm.
answer is like no, or disagree, or strongly disagree, because it's almost like a soapbox for the interviewer to be on. Now, it's not to say that there shouldn't be a sharing of
Right.
information, but the whole point of the interview is to like meet the person,
Mm-hmm.
understand who they are, what makes them tick, what they're excited about, strengths, opportunities, etc. So it's a really good point. And I'm sure, do you hear a lot about like ghosting and people not even getting like an interview or hearing back about their application to begin with?
This is terrible. I mean, there was a short amount of time. Well, it's been a while, but that I put out applications, and I put out application after application after application, and I wasn't even getting a receipt of application, and through some of these big websites, and I was not even getting a response that they got my application. And then if you did, you got an automated response, which was fine. At least I knew that they got it, and then nothing ever. And so here you feel like you're constantly, as a candidate, you're constantly going, oh, did I, what happened? And then again, going into the interview, okay, we'll get back to you. Okay, well, most people don't necessarily have the nerve to say, okay, when, what day, and when can I expect the call? Are you going to call, text, email? How, what,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay. So, and then not holding up to our promises to do that. And I think, we have to, come on, we've got to do people at least the courtesy to be able to do that, because they prepared for the interview. They came in, hopefully they were prepared. They looked at your website, they looked at your company, they looked at your business. They were able to at least give you some basics on who you were, which I think is another key point. But, and once they did that and they presented themselves, they hear nothing back. I mean, come on, what does that say about us? So what if you wanted to go back to their application 6 months later because, oh, I really remember, I really like that person. Now they don't want to work for you.
Mm-hmm.
What does that
Mm-hmm.
say about you as a company? So, whether they see you ever again, word of mouth is big. And, you want to be upstanding in your interview process and what you do and how you treat people. So I think that's just common courtesy.
Yeah, I
Gotta be.
agree. Right. I always say that you want to return people back to the world better than you found them. And usually I say that in the context of when someone joins a company, works for a company, and then ultimately leaves, that you want them to leave feeling better than the day they joined, or at least the same. You want like a net net. You really don't want them to feel worse. And a lot of the times we see that people resign one way or another for something that makes them feel disengaged or disgruntled. And most of the time, even if they had a fairly good experience, there's always like that one thing that sticks out that leads them to go back out into the world potentially with a lesser than view of the brand or the company or the organization. And all of this, every single thing that we've talked about today, has to do with brand awareness, brand recognition, reputation. And it's in a company's best interest to invest in hiring, to invest in the recruitment process so that people are hearing back one way or another, whether they're moving forward or not, and for there to continue to be an investment within HR and the departments therein, because even though not all of that falls on HR and it's everyone's responsibility to create amazing cultures, someone does kind of have to lead the charge with that. And we hope that the people leading the charge within HR also believe in this charge, right? So it's just all very interesting to me, this
And
whole bubble.
you go back to that, right, in terms of social media nowadays. And man, if people are leaving and they're disgruntled, your social media is, is going to be destroyed. Your online reputation is going to be destroyed, and people are again looking at that when they're going to work for a company. I remember looking at some of our competitors recently, and that was the first place I went, because how are you going to know, right? How are you going to know if they're a good company to work with? So I immediately went to their social media profiles and started to look at what people were saying about
Mm.
working there. And I realized, okay, well, they're not so much of a competitor anymore, because when people leave, they they don't like the way that they were treated, et cetera, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
online reputation of this company was terrible in terms of HR. So we have to think about that again, because this generation is looking at that. They're absolutely
Yeah.
looking at it's the Google review for businesses, and you've got to be aware of that, and you've got to be cognitive of how that looks.
Yeah, I love Gen Z for this, that there's like an absolute lack of flexibility with an expectation. You know, like the expectation is set and you've got to meet it. And if you don't meet it, then don't even talk to me. And I truly appreciate this about Gen Z because, as a millennial myself, I remember growing up, it was always like, oh, your generation this, your generation that, right? And I get it. I'm sure I have said that about Gen Z before, like, oh, this generation, and they're trying to bring back low-rise jeans. We worked so hard to get rid of them. Like, don't bring them back, right? But at the end of the day, Gen Z actually is transforming business. They're transforming the way that we know work to be and what we know this in whole bubble to be. And I think I guess I really, it's an ode to Gen Z because I really appreciate that there's just a total um I don't know what the phrase is, but it's like a really sticking to their guns and not reneging on what they expect from employers. And it's so true that if businesses are not giving this generation what they expect, then they're out. And the reality is that Gen Z is going to make up the majority of the workforce in just a few years,
Yeah,
probably 5 years.
yeah. Yep. I mean, isn't that full circle of the full thing that we're talking about? Is this is the generation that's in the workforce? If we are not adapting, if we're not changing, if we're not doing things that this generation is looking for, and they're sticking to their guns, what is our business going to look like in 5 years? What's it going to look like?
Right.
Is it going to be full of robots because we have chosen to pull the human out of our business, or did we embrace the things that they are looking for, and in exchange we got hard workers, we got people who are invested in us and who are going to continue to grow and move our businesses forward. And these creative minds are an asset to businesses in ways
Right.
that the other generations prior just don't know how to do, or it's going to take too long to learn. So bring in these people for the asset, bring in this generation for what they can contribute. And I think they can contribute really that forward thinking, and that technology and all of those things. And really all you have to do is sit back and uh, meet some of the small demands, which is what we're talking about: flexibility.
Right.
Most
Right.
flexibility. And if you do that, I think that you are going to get those good workers, those people who want to work and want to invest, because this generation are go-getters. They want to succeed. I think that's big. Again, social media, they want to be successful. And so, that's still very much important to them. So,
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. Hopefully there's some Gen Z listeners out there feeling really good about how we feel about their generation, because I totally agree. They are totally transforming business, and they're not asking for the world. They're asking for flexibility. And it's what we've been asking for our entire
entirely.
careers.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it didn't go anywhere. But then, it did take a catastrophic event for it all to happen. But at the same time, there are still a number of companies who really are behind this idea of flexibility and autonomy. And so, good job, Gen Z. We're here to celebrate you. uh, I love it, and I love that you have children within that generation too. So you know better than probably even I do because of this. So, Melissa, it has been such a pleasure getting to speak with you on now our third recording together, but especially on my podcast. I really appreciate it, and I would love to pass it to you to tell the listeners where they can connect with you and learn more about what you do and all of the above.
Absolutely. So if you'd like to learn more, we're at conciergeelite.com. You can also message me at melissa.b@conciergeelite.com. Come check us out. We do specialize in remote staffing, and we specialize again in the medical field, like I mentioned before, but we do have accounts in all fields. So this applies to any and everyone. If you want to just talk about how remote work can work for you, I'm happy to chat with you. So come check us out, conciergeelite.com.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I'll be sure to add all of that information in the show notes.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.